With so many demands on our time, often we forget how precious it is until it's almost gone. Are we doomed by the inherent nature of time and our concerns about catastrophes that we inherited as humans? We may desperately attempt to understand the concept of God, sacrifice, and adhering to a path that might avoid impending doom. With so many reminders in life that our experiences on this planet are temporary, often we engage in wondering about what kind of mark we will leave behind. At least our memories absorb our experience as we reflect on our countdown, expectations, and circumstances, right? However, what if you knew the world might end sooner than you would like? What impression are we making on our communities or in our personal or professional lives? The Aztecs are considered the last of the ancient Mexican civilizations. They lived large, unsubtle lives, grappling with the subtleties of life even if much of their plan was written in the stars, and they anguished over the temporariness of their world. Today, we beat ourselves up in our modern societies as we wonder, where did the time go? We might become spiritual. Alternatively, we start making up for lost time and making the kinds of sacrifices that we expect of others but ourselves seem challenged by. As our hourglass empties, despite what we go through now or what we have gone through in the past, how do we stand a chance of making sense of our place in the world? This dilemma may seem unique to us, as uniquely modern as digital communication. It might not surprise you that, in fact, it's a universal inquiry that has informed many cultures around the world, including the Aztec people. In the here and now, we might pursue a willingness to take on tasks and challenges that we might have procrastinated about when we consider our bucket lists or worry that life is passing us by. We suddenly find ourselves immersed in what life is really about instead of sitting there overwhelmed with it. We can feel it, although in the process we may wonder if our traditions, practices, and goals define us. In coming to terms with the why behind what we do with our lives, we're tapping into a very long, extraordinary human story. This story involves gazing into the abyss and reflecting on the temporariness of things, our bodies, relationships, the afterlife, and cultural ways. Moreover, that can be very scary depending on how we look at it. Ancient cultures like the Aztecs looked at temporariness, death interrelating with life, and their beliefs in something much bigger than their own individual lives. They let this guide their daily lives and their decisions. Some might criticize some of the ways that they handled their fears associated with being human and the way they expressed their devotion to their gods, especially how blood and sacrifice filtered into their rituals. Consider how many religions and belief systems import the power of blood into their traditions, their reckonings, and the nature of understanding either death or impending doom. It's sometimes worth considering how different their world was and how the past does not always explain the present, even as we find certain links and shedding of practices. We might appreciate stories about Japanese samurai and Aztec warriors, but appreciate they are of the past. Today, we might learn about a tradition that we find questionable from the perspective of being humane and sign a petition to attempt to sway the practitioners in finding a new method of worship and sacrifice. The processes of human growth are vast, and the potential of seeing ancient cultures as somehow less human is there, but it deprives us of seeing the whole picture. We need not condone or censure it. Others may draw parallels to the fate of many tribes, civilizations, empires, and secret societies. They may try to find explanations for these people, which for no apparently rational reason followed their hearts. They were subject to the power, cycles of suffering, agony, mercilessness, resorting to violence for moral order, and a self-image that determined that the world's very existence hinged on human deeds. That we might understand. Right here and right now, we're applying ourselves to our tasks, and if only we can revel in all of our accomplishments. At times, we wonder whose praise we seek in our pursuits. Sometimes we're doing it for our own sense of accomplishments. Other times, it's to show off our God-given talents and to prove our faith helps us achieve our goals. The Aztec Empire, with their deeply ingrained cultural practices, were also dealing with the reality of their times that were not just shaped by traditions and practices. Even though the records show that they worshipped the sun and were in tune with their universe, they were developing a civilization way before their introduction to the Old World. In developing an understanding of the Aztec culture, this book sets out to point out some of the complexities of their empire. It considers various perspectives on various attributes. It will look at the philosophies that shaped their view of the world. It will also explore their Nahuatl roots and popular misconceptions, medical knowledge, the extent of their trade networks, their rulers, and discussions about their origins and collapse. It will fascinate you as we consider aspects of their society that will help you build a cultural awareness of the Aztec existence. In the meantime, be sure to keep in mind the nature of their way of escaping the misery and temporariness in life, and consider it as a student of cultural anthropology. While the human story embraces different practices guided by our emotional journeys and beliefs, there is a tendency to potentially dismiss histories that may challenge our sensibilities or raise deep questions. Every step of the way, we can witness their concept of God and what guided their expansion in daily lives. They had very real concerns about how the world might end, and their role in making sure that didn't happen if they had anything to do with saving themselves from the possibility of destruction. If you're keeping up on the current portrayals of Mexicans, and by extension those who may be drawn to their Aztec roots in the media, you may have recently seen a controversy brewing in Texas. The controversy centers around an image on the cover of a Texas textbook that teaches Mexican-American heritage. The image depicts an, quote, Aztec dance look, and features a bare-chested man with an elaborate headdress. The content has been criticized as characterizing Mexican-Americans in a racist way and conflating the history of Mexico with that of Mexican-Americans, since the cover image is in no way reflective of today's Mexican-Americans. It also negatively depicts the Chicano movement of the Civil Rights era for its activism as separatist in nature, when they were seeking their own empowerment within the American community at large. Instead of celebrating the need for a group to claim its roots and stand proudly wherever they may be, stereotypes glaze over the real intentions of people who reclaim their own pasts. In reality, and with cultural sensitivity, the Chicano movement distinguished itself from Mexican roots by tapping into the very cultures that lived in the Mexican territories and the southwestern U.S. territories before Mexico existed. Chicanos consider themselves Olmec, Mayan, Toltec, Aztec, and various indigenous people. Steeping oneself in the iconography of the Aztec and authentic history isn't only for individuals tracking their family lines on Ancestry.com. Shows like the very popular wrestling show Lucha Underground on the El Rey network pride themselves in bringing on characters that are Aztec gods. Fans love it. The show researched the 7 Aztec tribes that lived in the Chicomastak, the place of the 7 caves, in Aztlan. Aztlan is purportedly the original home of the Aztec, meaning people of Aztlan. This book will later discuss some of the Aztec Genesis stories and of the Nahua people who emerged from the 7 caves. As legend would have it, at least in presenting the 7 tribes that this show refers to and comprises in their 7 medallions, these tribes were Xalcas, Acalua, Tepanecs, Tlahuicas, Tlaxcaltecs, Xochimilcas, and Aztecs. Some accounts list other tribes as part of the initial 7, like Malinacas and Huexozingus. People who view the show who have Latin roots feel like the show speaks to them on a cultural level. The Aztecs separated from the other Nahua tribes at these caves. The names of each of the tribes mentioned are derived mostly from the areas where they eventually settled after their exodus. The Lucha Underground title belt is comprised of gold from each of the 7 tribes. The show taps into the possible myth or legend of the Chicomastak that has historically been explored in many studies of the early migration of the Aztec and continues to enthrall anyone interested in Aztec history and their cultural traditions. According to mythology, the caves were like Mother Earth's womb. The 7 different caves brought into the world the leaders of the first people of these 7 tribes. As the metaphoric place of emergence of all people of Central Mexican descent, this place served as the ancestral homeland, even if it was blended into any factual attempts to fit together any migrations to real places. Some investigators who question that these caves were mythical have tried to identify it on modern maps. Others question a single point of origin, yet it has had a lasting effect in the cultural traditions. It's understandable, if we step back for a moment and consider how many cultural and religious traditions do not base their beliefs on empirical evidence, but need to honor the need of our ancient ones to provide some answers about why the world was the way it was. It reinforced the need for a sense of place and to find some threads to a history that was destroyed by conquerors. As we will discuss later, the Aztecs' creation myths shaped their daily lives. Moreover, while we may be in an information age, we must remember this. The purpose of myth has often been to a culture much less about proving the stories true, and more about explaining major events in a way that preserved the cultural values and traditions of a people, and didn't relegate the question as unanswerable, but allowed the listener to interpret the past. Many interpretations exist of the cave with the 7 tribes. As we will soon discuss, the organization of time and the rhythms of life govern the lives of the ancient Aztec. It is fascinating that a show like Lucha Underground weaves the folklore into their program in today's world, feeding the cultural needs of its viewers and helping them unlock the mysteries of the past. As important as it is to retain some cultural tie to a past for a people, it is also significant to consider primary sources, artifacts, ancient texts, and archaeological evidence in broadening our understanding of the ancient Aztecs. With a history of conquistadors invading their lands, the Aztec history has taken time, perseverance, and dedication. Building the history has been magnified by the interest of the future generations who didn't want to reduce them to a void or heap that could only retrace its steps to the times determined to coincide with their last gasps of self-identity. Interest in Aztec history soared between 1700 and 1800. Our understanding of the Aztec Empire relies on interpretations built on excavations, old manuscripts, statues, uncovered grand temples, codices, pictographs, Spanish chroniclers, pre-conquest ritual calendars, maps, and records that record tributes paid to kings and other royalty. Archaeologists have found tools, human remains, jewelry, and pottery. Ethnoastronomers elaborate on the evidence that has been found, revealing the confluence of religion and everyday life. There exist ethnographies from contemporary Nahuatl speakers and other indigenous people from Mesoamerica that also lend a valuable resource to our search for answers and to preserve scholarship in understanding Aztec metaphysics, philosophy, social order, their kings, practices, and their human struggles in the world they lived in. Some of the earliest excavations in the 1790s in Zocalo, today's main square in Mexico City, led to the discovery of the ancient Coatlicue statue in the Stone of the Sun. Coatlicue means she of the serpent skirt in the Nahuatl language of the Aztec, and this colossal statue was built sometime between 1487 and 1520. It is made of volcanic andesite and is 11 feet 6 inches high. Their large stone sculptures are considered one of the greatest artistic achievements. Hundreds of finely carved monuments have been revealed to broaden the interpretation of the Aztecs as bloodthirsty warriors. The Aztec artisans inherited a stone carving tradition dating back 2,000 years through the Olmecs, Toltecs, Maya, and Teotihuacan civilizations. According to Archaeology of Ancient Mexico and Central America, an encyclopedia, the Aztecs considered the acquisition of stone as an act of domination over the people who lived in the quarry's territory. In colonial descriptions of the Aztec sunstone, or calendar stone, the Aztecs considered the stones to have magical properties and that they could be used in devastating predictions about the overthrow of the empire. The deity Coatlicue has both female and male qualities, which is often the case in the Aztec cosmology. As the decapitated Aztec goddess of the earth, she wore a skirt made of snakes and a necklace of severed human hands and excised human hearts. Her role as both creator and destroyer of life has been emphasized in interpretations and also symbolizes the ambivalence of nature, according to Maria Herrera Sobek in Celebrating Latino Folklore, an Encyclopedia of Cultural Traditions, Volume 1. Coatlicue was celebrated twice a year in the House of Darkness, her temple in Tenochtitlan, during the spring ceremony of Tozozantli to celebrate the oncoming rain season and harvest, and during the autumn ceremony of Quicholi to celebrate the hunt. These religious practices involved human sacrifice and bloodletting, including flayed skin as an offering to the earth goddess. Much has been written about the religious mythology of Coatlicue, and you can find some excellent starting points listed in the resources section of the book. The Aztec Stone of the Sun is a carved stone that depicts each of the 20 days of the month associated with a god. It resembles a sundial. The stone is 4 feet thick and 12 feet in diameter, and weighs 24 tons. At the center of the stone, they carved a human-like face with an obsidian sacrificial knife, Tipatal, as a tongue, depicting the fifth sun, Tonatiuh. This stone has helped archaeologists understand and substantiate the prevailing thinking that Aztecs believed they were living at the time of the fifth sun. There is much debate about the significance of some of the dates that are described on the stone and whether the declining period of the fifth sun led to a day of destruction, or whether the stone celebrates the creation of the fifth sun, the era of the Aztec Empire. This book will further shed light on the mysteries of the ages, suns, as the Aztecs saw it. According to Manuel Aguilar Moreno in A Handbook to Life in the Aztec World, the stone symbolizes the creation of the fifth sun. He suggests that it acts as a celebration of the creation of a world where the forces of creation and destruction play equal roles. Others, like Susan Milbrath in Heaven and Earth in Ancient Mexico, Astronomy and Seasonal Cycles in the Codex Borgia, seem to suggest that the day 4 Olin is the name of the fifth sun of the current era, and the predicted date of a cataclysmic earthquake that would destroy the Aztecs. Milbrath continues to reveal that some codices and studies have focused on 4 Olin and its meaning. One of them, the Codex Terriano Remenses 12v, says that if the earth begins to tremble and the sun is eclipsed on this day, then the world will end. The end of El Quinto Sol has been the subject of debate. The search for these antiquities were spawned by groups that wanted to distinguish themselves from an imperial Spanish background, like the Creoles and the Mestizos. During these politically charged times, they began to use evidence of Aztec and indigenous heritage as symbols of opposition to being ruled by Spaniards across the sea, according to David Carrasco in The Aztecs, a very short introduction. During the early 1800s, they unearthed sculptures of the goddess Coyolxauhqui. In 1913, they uncovered the Great Temple in Mexico City. More excavations in the 1970s led to unearthing treasures in Tenochtitlan, like the Coyolxauhqui stone at the base of the Great Temple. According to Nicholas J. Saunders and Tony Allen in The Aztec Empire, the site was considered so important that the President of Mexico in 1978 issued an order authorizing its excavation. A museum was opened at the Great Temple in 1987, containing significant numbers of antiquities. The Coyolxauhqui stone depicts the daughter of Coatlicue dismembered on the ground for plotting to kill her own mother. You can find the details of the dismemberment by her unborn brother, Huitzilopotli, who only appears grown to stop his sister and the other siblings, in Crossroads in Cultures, combined volume, A History of the World's Peoples. According to the authors, sacrificed warriors from all over the empire would have gotten a good look at the circular stone before climbing the temple stairs to their own deaths. As we will further explore, Aztec people couldn't escape the attached significance and meaning of the stories of their gods. Not only the leaders of the empire, but their religious leaders and sculptors reinforced these same concepts of what was considered not just myth, but became the reality that underpinned their code of living. As we will learn later, while the status of an individual played a significant role in what was expected of them in playing out their traditions, no one truly escaped the perpetuated responsibilities to the fifth sun. Embrace with us our search of the past to understand how the Aztecs grappled with the ephemeral nature of life. Consider how sacrifice played into their understanding of human responsibility, as they heeded the catastrophes that inevitably ruled their world. Despite what a peripheral search of Aztec life may reap, the Aztecs experienced many defining moments during their empire besides the Spanish conquest, led by famed conquistador Hernán Cortés in 1519 to 1521. Just like we might think of a headline in the newspaper can start a conversation, the same thing holds true about the Aztecs, who were a worthy and noble empire before they were forced to change the trajectory of their history forever. The Aztecs wanted to exert power and did so with the concepts to structures military, social, and political that differed from more familiar Western concepts that appear to us throughout history. They grew a dynamic empire over the course of nearly 200 years from 1325 to 1521. Early defining moments in their efforts to build an empire that would rival all others in their surroundings include their arrival in the Valley of Mexico circa 1300 to establish their capital in Tenochtitlan, located just north of modern-day Mexico City. The discovery of a sense of place at the command of one of their gods, Huitzilopochtli, for the Aztecs was crucial for the future of their empire. Although there are different accounts and legends about the 100-year migration that led them away from the land of white herons, Aztlan, they eventually settled in Tenochtitlan, led in the last stages by the priest Tenoche. The capital itself was founded in 1325. Accounts vary as to whether Aztlan is a real location. More about the legend about how the Aztec sun god Huitzilopochtli delivered to the Aztec leaders, in particular Tenoche's vision of eagle and cactus. A message to leave Aztlan and fulfill the prophecy will be shared in the next chapter. However, when they arrived in the Valley of Mexico, the Toltecs ruled. In 1171, they were overthrown in an uprising that included the Aztecs. On their way to Tenochtitlan, they first settled in Chapultepec, or Grasshopper Hill. They moved to Culhuacan in Tizapan, where their tradition of human sacrifice turned off the neighbors. Although they had begun trading in the Culhuacan markets and offered themselves as warriors in the service of the king, they did not remain in good favor. Although some sources suggest that this is a semi-mythical turn of events for the Aztecs, according to Assaulting the Past, Violence and Civilization in Historical Context, the Aztecs decided to mark their settlement by sending emissaries to Achigometal, the ruler of Culhuacan, to request his daughter as the bride to their god Huitzilopochtli and bestow her as a living goddess. Upon Achigometal's arrival, he and his dignitaries entered the temple and to his horror saw one of the priests dressed in the skin of his daughter. He vowed to annihilate the Aztecs. During the war, the Aztecs were driven away. Many Aztec kings traced their genealogy to the Toltecs. Their empire developed between 900 CE to 1200 CE. Aztecs borrowed heavily from Teotihuacan, which was originally considered to be constructed by the Toltecs. However, eventually, further studies and more evidence disproved this when it became clear that Teotihuacan was significantly older than the Toltec main capital of Tula. While the Toltecs acquired skills from the descendants of the Teotihuacan, the Toltec rose to power after the collapse of Teotihuacan, after they arrived in the Valley of Mexico in 900 CE, led by their powerful king, Mixcoatl. The respect that the Toltec earned from many tribes in the area meant that many of them claimed Toltec ancestry. The Aztecs borrowed from them regarding technology, military organization, and other ways. According to Professor Miguel León Portilla, the recipient of the National Institute of Anthropology and History's greatest distinction, the Eagle Warrior Award, the nomads who finally made it to Tenochtitlan so admired the Toltecs that they chose as their very first king a Tlatoani, a nobleman of Toltec origin. King Acamapichli was from Culhuacan and fathered a great number of children by various Aztec women. Their descendants formed the nucleus of the noble social class, or Pipiltan. As you will come to appreciate in learning about the Aztec, they had a highly stratified social system of classes that they developed during their empire years. More will be discussed about this king in the next chapter. According to many experts, the term Aztec was acquired from European chroniclers, but the term is stuck. Many who focus on the Aztec use the more appropriate term Mexica, pronounced Mexica. The ancestral root language of the Aztec, Apache, Toltec, Hopi, Shoshone, and Navajo is Nahuatl. One term that was also used by the Toltecs at the time was Nahuashishimec. According to the Aztec Calendar Handbook, the Mexica rulers assumed many of their origin stories, adapted them to their own historical realities, and assumed their agricultural traditions. In adopting the Toltec form of ruling with different ruling houses, their system was not really a true fit to the European notion of empire, but more like a confederate system of allied lineage and Cowpally clan structures. This allowed for autonomous home rulers when they conquered areas and a system of tribute collection that enforced their dominance and gave them economic control over conquered populations. Calpolese are considered the fundamental unit in the social pecking order of Aztec society. The figure Tenoch is written about and studied as both legendary myth and leader of the Aztecs. During his rule, the city of Tenochtitlan offered many ceremonial centers, markets, and ball courts. Tenoch, or Tenoch, means stone cactus fruit, and Tenochtitlan means among the stone cactus fruit. Although some reference materials question whether Tenoch was a real person, others claim he was the first emperor of Tenochtitlan from 1325 to 1375. Although we might more loosely interpret empire, given that at the time of his rule the city itself was being established and a large army was forming, its missions were not yet borne out, and their organization was limited in scope. During that time, they built this empire between the kingdoms of Azcapotzalco and Texcoco. Given they were a new presence, they lacked power and became food gatherers and agriculturalists to exchange goods. The ruler of Azcapotzalco, King Tesosomoc, decided to tax the Mexica heavily. In response, they reacted by expanding their kingdom. As we will discuss the various kings that lorded over the Aztec people later and their effect on the Aztec Empire, it is notable to consider how trade defined them, as did some of the symbols of their great civilization. Trade was crucial to building their empire, alongside their tribute systems, their political accomplishments, and their cultural icons and beliefs. It's easy to imagine that geopolitics in the Aztec era of Mesoamerica was highly complex given the number of kingdoms, customs, and power struggles. They were not only defined by warfare and diplomacy. Researchers from North Carolina State University, the Centro de Investigación y de Estudios Avanzados del Instituto Politécnico Nacional Unidad Mérida, Purdue University, and El Colegio de Michoacán, found that despite how the Aztec could have disrupted trade, they didn't always. One case in point focuses on the Tlaxcalan. While conflict and perpetual warfare did exist between the Aztecs and the Tlaxcala, it doesn't appear that the Aztec attempted to sabotage all of the Tlaxcalan dealings that concerned other kingdoms. Today, Tlaxcala offers one of the most fascinating luminescent natural phenomena to visitors. Each year, a large population of fireflies arrive to mate, and thousands of viewers visit to witness the nighttime illumination between June and August. Aztecs saw the fireflies as tiny lights of truth in the ignorance surrounding them, according to the late Charles L. Hogue, a cultural entomologist who wrote the first comprehensive guide to insect life in the region, Latin American Insects and Entomology. For a little background about Tlaxcala, the book Native Claims, Indigenous Law Against Empire, 1500 to 1920, offers some historical perspective. Tlaxcala was halfway between the Gulf of Mexico and the Valley of Mexico. It served as a trading hub throughout most of the period between 900 and 1500 CE. It was not a closed community, and goods moved from the Central Valley to the coast and all the way to the Yucatan. Regarding its relations with the Aztec, we can find many sources, but one to start out with gives us a little insight. Patricia Ibarra in Performing Conquest, 5 Centuries of Theater, History, and Identity in Tlaxcala, Mexico, explained that Tlaxcala's identity was marked by its exclusion from the Triple Alliance of 1426, an alliance which we will go into further detail about in the next chapter. Suffice it to say, the Aztecs united with the city-state of Texcoco and Tlacopan. Tlacopan was a city-state that was situated very close to the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, on the shores of Lake Texcoco. As part of their Aztec imperial strategy, the three united against the long tyranny of the Tepanecs. The Tepanecs, whose capital was Azcapotzalco, made vassals of the new inhabitants of the island in Lake Texcoco that the Aztecs named Tenochtitlan. According to Global Connections, Volume 1 to 1500, Politics, Exchange, and Social Life in World History, the rise of city-states in the valley made local politics unstable. As Tenochtitlan grew, they became respected allies rather than suspicious mercenaries. By the 1510s, Tenochtitlan was considered a major power among the half-dozen in the valley. As soon as King Tesosomoc died, the Aztecs, along with these two city-states, crushed the Tepanecs. Despite having gained tributes on conquered towns the Aztecs had assisted the Tepanecs in claiming previously. Tlaxcala and two other independent states adjacent to the basin, Huejotzingo and Matztefan, had sharp conflicts with the Aztec. They participated in various wars of ritualistic significance. However, according to The Legacy of Mesoamerica, History and Culture of a Native American Civilization, Tlaxcala stood in the way of the Aztec Empire's access to the resources of the rich coastal lowlands to the east. The relationship among these states was extremely competitive. By not becoming part of the alliance, they were forced to fortify themselves with walls and become isolated purposefully by the Aztecs. The Aztecs did block Tlaxcalan trade routes in 1502, preventing them from obtaining salt and cotton. In later years, the Tlaxcalans allied with the Spanish in fighting against the oppression suffered by their own people under the Aztec. However, the recent finding by the mentioned study conducted by North Carolina State University, along with several universities, question our assumptions that the Aztecs, who were openly hostile to the Tlaxcalans, would always intervene in the trade the latter conducted. When the researchers found that the Aztecs did not intervene with the Tlaxcalans when they obtained their obsidian from El Paredon, just outside the boundaries of the Aztec Empire, they considered a few scenarios, including that obsidian was so easy to acquire that it would have been a waste of time for the Aztec. Despite the fact that there was an economic rift and open conflict, the Aztecs did not always overpower the Tlaxcala in trade-related matters. Although piecing together that one relationship with the Tlaxcala can be useful, it's also an opportunity to consider the trade networks the Aztec conducted and the value of trade in this geopolitically complex Mesoamerican environment. It's better than stereotyping the Aztecs with a profile that brings to mind the Spanish Inquisition or bloody massacres. Although merchants held a high status in the extensive trade that the Aztecs conducted in the region, much has been written about the animosity between Aztec males and these very merchants. Still, the mountains were rich with gold, lumber, and water. Merchants made salves from prickly pear cactus. Moreover, the benefit of market systems was clearly recorded in documents showing rulers' incomes from market taxes. For starters, let's define a few terms. The Aztec market was called the tianguis and was considered a pillar of the Aztec economy. The hierarchy within the merchant class included guilds. In fact, the Aztec were said to have at least 30 guilds, according to American Indian Contributions to the World, including all types of craftspeople. Merchants traded goods and food. Masewaltin, common people, worked as artisans, farmers, and laborers in Aztec society. Merchants traded the goods produced by the Masewaltin. The Pochteca were at the top. Local and regional traders were called Tlaniquilo or Tlaniquiloani. Tlatmemes, porters or burden carriers, carried the goods that the merchants traded and wore them on their backs in woven containers or tied to hide-covered frames on their backs. A tump-line strap that crossed their forehead allowed them to carry weights up to 50 pounds for 13 to 18 miles a day. Every town within the Aztec Empire had a market. People paid with gold-dusted bird feather quills, cacao beans, and woven cotton capes. If you're interested in learning more about how the market systems changed over time and corresponded to the locally based political confederations and wider market systems resulting from political centralization, Archaeology of Ancient Mexico and Central America, an encyclopedia, looks at the changes in the distribution of ceramics that is fascinating. The Pochteca were the most elite merchants who went on long-distance trade expeditions importing luxury items. This special guild of wealthy commoners controlled long-distance trade. Luxury items included shells, textiles, jaguar pelts, rock crystals, obsidian, gold, and pottery. They would return with chicle, the gum of the sapodilla tree, medicines, herbs, nuts, cotton, rubber, and art. They lived in Altepeme, where they concealed their wealth behind high walls. According to Kent Flannery's The Creation of Inequality, How Our Prehistoric Ancestors Set the Stage for Monarchy, Slavery, and Empire, they had their own armed guards since they traveled at night through hostile territories. Their favorite destination was Cicalango, which was located in the Mexican state of Tabasco. According to Michael C. Howard in Transnationalism in Ancient and Medieval Societies, The Role of Cross-Border Trade and Travel, Once the Aztec traders reached the lowlands of Tabasco, they came in contact with the Maya traders who used canoes extensively. Apparently, the Aztec did not and would rely on the Chantal Maya for water transport. They also traveled to Tlatelolco open market, north of Tenochtitlan, where 50,000 people shopped daily. The market in Tenochtitlan attracted 25,000 people. This class of merchants was considered invaluable to the king since they could act as spies and agents of the kingdom, and the king could use their death or any attacks on the Pochteca as a pretext for war on uncooperative states. The Pochteca were powerful. They derived substantial profits from regional exchanges and provided the upper-class items that were highly prized from foreign destinations. Bruce Trigger in Understanding Early Civilizations, a comparative study, explains that representatives of the Pochteca were empowered to arrest, sentence, and punish petty criminals, dishonest traders, and any tax evaders that dared to operate in the marketplaces. Members of their associations could be tried and sentenced by another Pochteca. They had the right to execute their own members without royal approval as part of their policing authority. However much authority their privileged position granted them, there was still a stigma associated with the merchants that was based on suspicion given that they had close contacts with merchants from hostile communities. Although they kept their trade secrets and routes and were among an elite guild, they were not considered nobles, and they were beneath the Techuitli, lords. Tolteca, craftsmen, fell below the merchants. Slave traders also had a high status. The Pochteca's god was Yatecutli, the patron of commerce, known as the long-nosed god and also the lord who guides. They conducted business through barter. They could make loans of food and articles in return for pledges of land and other possessions, according to Christina Jacqueline Johns in The Origins of Violence in Mexican Society. Although they were considered upwardly mobile and could travel relatively freely to all parts of Mesoamerica, those of the merchant class may have been rivalrous with one another. They also received animosity from other Aztec males. For one thing, according to Canadian archaeologist, anthropologist, and ethnohistorian Bruce Trigger, the Aztecs believed that social mobility or high status was only legitimate as a reward for outstanding military service. Their long-distance trade was considered ignoble. They could not hold public office, had to dress modestly in public, as opposed to soldiers who could proudly display their high status, and they could not marry a noble. Additionally, if they wanted to become a slave trader or the head of a Pochteca Calpulli, they had to sponsor a sacrifice and secure the cooperation of a high-ranking warrior. Before we talk about their notable defining figureheads, it's very interesting to note the studies continue to take a deeper look at how the Aztec conducted trade and how their strict merchant classes and social hierarchies affected which luxury goods were enjoyed and by whom. Susan E. Alcock in Empires, Perspectives from Archaeology and History thinks that scholars have been misled into giving luxury goods too much importance to exaggerated claims of Aztec nobles in the works of often quoted Spanish chroniclers like Sagwan and Duran. In her own excavations at provincial Aztec sites, she found that even Aztec peasants in provincial villages had obtained luxury items even though sumptuary rules did exist. These laws prohibited commoners from wearing certain items that were associated with nobility to reinforce social hierarchies. While there are likely many symbols of the Aztec civilization, one that is particularly influential is Nesowe Coyote. Another is the old symbol that you see on Mexico's flag today. Let's start with the latter. Did you ever look closely at the Mexican flag? In the middle of the flag, there is an old Aztec symbol. When Mexico won freedom from Spain in 1821, the symbol became their national emblem. Where did this symbol come from? Since Mexico City used to be Tenochtitlan, which was the capital of the Aztec Empire and the first place Aztecs began to establish themselves permanently, the story of the symbol takes us back to that migration to Tenochtitlan. As legend has it, the leaders of the Aztecs received prophetic guidance in the land of the White Herons, Aztlan, although many question their single point of origin. Others continue the unconcluded debate whether the legendary Chicomastok is real or a mythical origin place of many of the Nahuatl-speaking peoples. The Toltec version of the first wave of Mexica arriving in central Mexico states that they came around 540 BCE from what is now the southwestern U.S. According to the Aztec Calendar Handbook, one expert who published in the 1950s considered that the martial land of reeds, or Atzland and the legendary Seven Caves, is a site in what is now called Kanab, Utah. Others think the group originated in the old Tule Lakes in the Central Valley of California. Still others theorize it might be eastern Oakland. Others, like David Carrasco in his book Cave, City, and Eagle's Nest, an interpretive journey through the Mapa de Cuautinchan, Issue 2, have combined all the clues together and figured out that the journey lasted 13 days and have broken down the number of days it would take to walk to Tenochtitlan. Either way, it has survived through the ages and explains the symbol on the Mexican flag.